Session 4, New Testament Analysis Presentation, Sanctification. Introduction. What does sanctification mean? To be sanctified means to be free from sin and to live holy. So, what was the significance of this doctrine in Paul's theology? How did Jesus influence Paul's understanding of this doctrine? What impact does this have on the modern church? Finally, how should Christians live in light of this doctrinal truth? These questions will be answered here. Significance of the doctrinal theme, sanctification. Glorification of God, death to sin, life to righteousness, love of Christ, the Holy Spirit, to make holy through the act of God's grace. The word sanctification is powerful. To be free from sin and made for a purpose is something inspiring to hear. The sanctification doctrine is important because it shows God's effort in presenting the difference between believers and non-believers. It sets them apart from one another. Sanctification also shows how connected Christians are to Jesus. Because Jesus died on a cross, believers are intertwined with Jesus. Believers are in Jesus because of faith, and he is in believers by power of the Holy Spirit. The sanctification doctrine is important because it shows the glorification of God. How the teachings of Jesus influence Paul's understanding of sanctification. Flesh means death, spirit means life. Sin means no spirit of Christ. Spirit means Christ lives in you. Sin cannot please God. Spirit gives life to the human body, predestined to be like Jesus. The teachings of Jesus had a huge impact on how Paul grew to understand sanctification. When one focuses on being led by the flesh, it shows a sinful nature, and when one focuses on the spirit, it shows a spirit-filled nature. When humans follow the path of sin, it leads to death. But if they follow the path of the Holy Spirit, they will be led to life and peace. Being sanctified means a believer is free from sin and should be as Christ-like as possible. They should do their best to live a holy life so that one can be pleasing in the eyes of the Lord. Sin does not and will not please God. What impact does this doctrine have on the modern church? Gives guidance and motivation, work as a team in living for Jesus, share holiness within the community, support one another, charities, and good works. The sanctification doctrine has a huge impact on the modern church. It reminds Christians of what it means to be spirit-filled and gives direction. It reminds the church that they should give guidance and motivation to Christian followers. It shows how to work as a team and living for Jesus. Sanctification reminds the church to share what holiness means within the community. It also reminds the church to give back and continue to bring people to Jesus. In other words, holiness should be characteristics of the community, and an individual grows in his or her personal holiness by submitting to God's Spirit, who sanctifies the whole. How should Christians live in light of this doctrinal truth? Spread the gospel. Help one another to live up to holiness. Work as a team in living for Jesus. Support one another. Continue to fight against sin. Help the less fortunate. Sanctification comes from a combination of being redeemed because of Jesus, but also continues being applied every day because of the Holy Spirit. It is not about trying to be perfect, but being tireless and never giving up on the constant fight against sin. Christians should work on spreading the gospel and help one another to do their best to follow the Spirit. They should support each other in living for Jesus and help the less fortunate find their way to Jesus, no matter what that situation might be. Conclusion. In conclusion, sanctification is a huge doctrine that needs to have continued effort put into living up to it. No one is perfect, but through sanctification, believers are free from sin and should continue to try and live up to the holiness of Jesus Christ. Sanctification is an act of God's grace and therefore should not be taken lightly. To be sanctified does not mean that one is free to do whatever they please. If a Christian follows sin, that is the sure way to death. The modern church needs to give guidance to Christ's followers and be a great support system for a believer to do their very best on this journey called life. Finally, Christians need to follow and trust in the Holy Spirit to guide them. This will lead to a life of peace and happiness.